I just love maps. I've always loved maps. When other kids, when they were, 12 or 14, would say they wanted to grow up to be doctors or engineers or firemen or whatever it was, I was like, I want to be a cartographer, Mom. And she said, "What's a cartographer?" And they just make maps and they explore. I mean, it was simplification, of course, but since I was a little kid, I loved maps, and I've got a small collection of historic maps, and just makes me daydream all the time about where to go to next.
Similar to the Nicolas Cage movie where he finds the map hidden in the Declaration of Independence, no doubt.
Right, absolutely, just like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. And when you think about maps, there aren't always maps that guide us to the next phase of what we're doing in life and sport, in our careers. And you, of course, last fall launched a new endeavor. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin of what you're doing now?
Yeah, I launched Alter Exploration last November, October, November, and that was in some ways a long time coming. I've been guiding people for many years. I, I've been guiding my parents for their whole life. I would like to say, but no, groups of friends, colleagues in the cycling industry. I've been doing that sort of one off here and there. And it was always meant to be these trips that were just on the cusp of. Um, I like to say that there's a moment on any trip that I do, whether it was prior to the start of the business or now, where the people are going to be cursing me somewhat dramatically at times because they might be friends. But later that same day, they're going to be thanking me for what I've just put them through. And that has always been in the back of my head of creating an opportunity to do that safely, of course, with no intent to ever crack somebody so much that they never want to ride a bike again or go for a trail run or whatever, but teach them through the lessons of challenge. And that's kind of what the business is all about, or intends to be all about. And it took me a long time to get there. The boring stuff, or the boring side of that story being, well, I didn't know if I could run a business by myself, and I never had, had a journalism background and I had some science background, but I didn't have any business sense. So there's that side of it. But then it was also, how big is the market for people who want to go out and hurt themselves like that, in the hands, putting their trust in someone else that they don't really know. And of course, lots of people like to do hard things in endurance sports. We're doing them all the time. It's just the trust piece, and having somebody else lead them in a sense through such an experience. So
And Scott, can you talk a little bit about what is it that draws people to these types of challenges generally? Is there like an evolutionary psychology origin of why people, I guess in particular, people who are drawn to endurance sports want to put themselves through these self-imposed ordeals, whether it's going on a bike race, running a 5K, getting off the couch and going running, or going and doing an exploration or an adventure? Why do we do this?
Well, I'm going to have to say that the answer I'm going to give you is part based on intuition and experience, and maybe a tiny amount of data that gathered in my head somewhere along the line. But there's a really long and rich history of people doing this kind of thing. You can look at practices of ascetics, right? Going way back into spiritual practices where people did ritualistic things that were hard, right? They would go out into the mountains and go without food, without water, and wait to have a kind of transformative spiritual experience. Now, for most of us, right, we live pretty safe lives, right? I know I get up in the morning, I going to get my cup of coffee, or the world, it'll be a complete disaster if it's not a good cup of coffee. We're pretty safe, right? I think about friends who do mountaineering, and often they're coming from a world like I do, and then once a year they hire a guide to take them into some kind of predicament that might be a little bit above their comfort zone. but they put their trust in someone to guide them through that. And Chris, what you were describing really reminds me a lot of the model that's been alive and well in mountaineering for a long time that really is just making its way to cycling. I think we grow from these experiences that push us a little bit outside of our comfort zone. And having someone to guide you and knowing you can put your trust in them and get back is a wonderful thing. Even as individuals like we are who do that for ourselves on a regular basis, how wonderful to be able to have somebody to help to show us the way to do that safely and in a structured way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the mountaineering aspect here, because that's how I like to frame what I do, whether it's mountaineering or big mountain skiing or heli skiing. That professional guide that has a reputation for doing things safely, taking people to a place where it is just beyond what they know before, and they wouldn't do it otherwise. And that's what I'm trying to bring to the cycling world, whether it's a bike packing circumnavigation of Iceland or, a week of really hard riding in a place like the Dolomites. That bringing that discomfort, but also holding their hand just somewhat so that they get the most out of it and learn from it.
Chris, what experiences did you have as a practitioner or athlete that helped you create the model for the specific experiences? Have you had kind of crucible moments yourself where you've been, push yourself beyond whatever, you put yourself in an environment where you're deeply uncomfortable, the people around you have pushed you into it? What's that been like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Throughout life, I've done things that were intentionally beyond what I knew I could do. And this is all relative, we must say, because what I do on a bike is in some ways a lot smaller than what ultra and some bike like what Lachlan Morton does pretty much every day or gears up to do 3 times a year. I mean, he does big stuff. So putting that aside, I've had these moments in life where and it's usually when I've been alone and I took a chance, and either it was I was on a VeloNews trip and I had a few extra days and I said, I'm just going to go ride. I don't have a lot of time. I'm going to go ride to those passes that I've always wanted to ride to, and I'm going to link this thing together. Took out the map and I made this gigantic loop or route, and I didn't exactly have the time, and I didn't necessarily have all the interest in the world in knowing exactly what I was going to do. I was making it a little bit up on the fly. I was also intentionally some would argue maybe this is dumb, but I was intentionally not researching exactly what type of terrain I was going to get into. I wanted to give myself that sense that I was out there exploring, that I was doing something that somebody else hadn't done before. Of course, people have done pretty much everything at this point. But in those moments, you learn who you are a lot more than if you stay in your house every day and sit at a desk. And I'm not picking on that lifestyle, but I'm just saying that out in those moments when you are exposed, you have to either tap into skills that you didn't know you had, or you have to make them up, and you have to improvise, and you have to problem solve, and you have to tap into whatever resiliency you might have already, or grow it or hone it. These are all things you can't really do when you're surrounded by comfort and convenience. You have to challenge yourself. You have to expose yourself. You have to become vulnerable in order to learn and grow.
And Chris, I haven't had Lachlan Morton on this podcast yet. I imagine I would like to at some point in the future. I think that's an interesting example, though, and something that I have reflected on quite a bit, and I've talked to a number of guests about, is whether pushing ourselves in contexts where we've done something a number of times, or we have an analogy or a framework for what we're about to experience. If we just do that thing over and over, whether it's going and doing a gravel race, for some people it might be, hey, I'm a serial entrepreneur, I'm starting another business. But once you've done something and you do more of the same thing, you do your 14th Ironman, your 15th Ironman, you do Unbound 200 for the 5th time, is that actually still hard? And is that actually pushing you into new and different spaces? And when I think about someone like Lachlan, he's going out and doing stuff in a lot of different contexts that are way beyond what I personally, I think, would find to be enjoyable, and definitely would not find to be comfortable. And it's what the guy does all the time. So I actually have no idea whether I imagine that for him, he's pushing his boundaries. But to actually get this effect that we're talking about and to put yourself in a space of growth, you can't be in that comfort zone or in a familiar space. Or can you? Like, I'm throwing that out there for discussion.
Well, I don't think you can, but the person that does an Ironman time after time after time, or Unbound time after time, I think they're looking for something different. They're trying to improve in maybe small and more subtle ways to go faster, for instance, or maybe they're in the case of an Ironman trying to hone one of the 3 skills and working on that within the context of a bigger event. I don't know the reasons there. They're working on something, I would imagine, or maybe they're just doing it purely for the joy or the fun of it, or conversely, maybe they're doing it because they're masochists, and that's exactly what they need. But I tend to believe, and I having ridden with Lachlan quite a bit and had lots of conversations over the years with him, I feel like he believes what I believe, which is you will gain so much more and grow in so much in different ways by doing things that you don't know whether you can do them or not. How do you know if you can do something until you try? Right. And that's why he's on a world tour road team. And when's the last time he raced a road bike? I haven't ridden with him on a road bike in 5 or 6 years. He's always on a mountain bike or sometimes a gravel bike. And yeah, he rarely races road. Now I don't want to like get on the, we could talk about a lot about Lachlan, and you definitely should have him on the show because he's a really smart guy, and
That's what I hear.
And would have a lot to share with guests about this very topic. I don't know, Scott, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit more too?
Yeah, I just have an idea. So I think I had a time where I was in the midst of raising kids. I rode my bike, but I didn't embrace any new technology at all. And that probably went on for 15 or 20 years. And then I came back as the kids got older, I got more time, came back into doing a little racing, and everything had moved on. Power meters became the thing that everybody on a club ride has. Everybody has a head unit that has endless maps and guidance systems and things. It's very hard to get lost, and everything is weighed and measured to such an extreme degree now that I think we in some ways are turning our recreational outlets where we have these opportunities to get lost. I mean, I've gotten lost plenty of times on my bike, but it's almost impossible now with a head unit. I can come back and I know exactly how many watts I put out and this and that. There's a way in which it can become so incredibly structured now, right? And so driven in some ways by metrics and data, even for recreational cyclists, that I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and how what you're doing might be in some ways an antidote to that.
I'm a bit of a Luddite, I think. I don't use power meters. I don't even use heart rate monitors, or I don't wear a Whoop strap. I do nothing when it comes to data. I don't even write down a number of RPE after any ride. Now, that's just where I'm at. I'm not really racing anymore. But to be fair, or to be totally honest, I didn't really train with power and heart rate that much when I was racing at my best. I occasionally worked with Trevor Connor, my co-founder of Fast Talk Labs, and somebody I worked with at VeloNews on some of these projects. He would train me, and he would make me use that stuff so that he could use it as a coach. But personally, I love not having data around me when I'm out on these journeys, big and small. I don't want to be distracted by numbers and data. And I also feel like without those things, I have to be much more, I just have to look inward more. I have to know myself better. I have to take account of all the sensations I'm feeling, legs, head, heart, the whole body. That way I know, because within me, I know, quote unquote, know the way I should be training or want to be training. The data is great. It can lead to amazing progress in athletes. But if you don't have it or you choose not to use it and you still want to, peak for a race or improve, then you have to use your body. You have to use your own senses to be that gauge of what you're doing, how hard you're going. And we all know that it's subjective and it's really hard to get that accurate. But the more you do it, the more you practice it, the better you can get. And maybe you're leaving something on the table by not using data, or maybe you're, it's not the pinnacle, but it's what I prefer. I don't want the distractions. I don't want the clutter of the data. And I also feel like I benefit from knowing myself better as an athlete and to some degree as a human by just looking inward.
It's interesting how there have been a proliferation, as you've highlighted, Chris and Scott, of wearables, of devices that track different things. There's all of this data and it has its place. It can be useful. And I think at the world tour level of cycling, it's indisputably part of why we are seeing athletes at a younger age than ever before perform at a higher level, coupled with, I think, advances in nutrition and exercise physiology. And at the same time, Chris, I think what you're highlighting is that interoception, or experiencing reembodiment and connection to what's actually going on with your mind and body, which in many ways, technology and society today are designed to make us not do. If you think about most technologies, particularly social media, they're dissociative technologies. We have this illusion of connection to other people. We have this illusion of action through consumption. And in reality, it's often anxiety provoking, passive, makes you feel worse, and makes you lose connection with who you are and what you're doing. This will sound probably totally unrelated to what we're talking about, but something that I experienced this weekend where I was put in a position of being a total beginner and had to really come back into contact with my body and mind in a new way was I had my buddy Kendrick Anderson over here. He is a master craftsperson, woodworker, and he very graciously offered to help me resurface a half pipe that I have. I'd never done this before. The half pipe was here when we moved into this house. My 4-year-old daughter and my 6-year-old son are really interested in skateboarding. It was a fantasy of mine as a young person growing up in Kansas City, Missouri, that I would have a ramp, which I never had. And so I was like, okay, Kendrick wants to help. We're going to resurface this thing. He did all of the really hard parts of getting the new surface on there. And then I did just kind of the really basic tactical stuff. And driving in 400 screws with star heads with my impact hammer, and then bondoing all the different parts of the surface to try to get it smooth. This is all stuff that I'm terrible at. And I had to really go into this space of, this is a great opportunity for me to reconnect to my mind and body in a new way, to do this thing I've never done before. And it was really uncomfortable. I mean, there are probably a lot of people out there thinking, really, that was hard for you? But it was pretty, it's just not something that I do every day, and that afforded me this opportunity to have to be present, or it just wasn't going to get done correctly. So it might seem pretty far afield from endurance sports and kind of what we're talking about around coming into focus, presence, and reconnecting to your body. But when I read about what you're doing now, Chris, and these adventures that you're taking people on, that I think is actually a new frontier of where humans need to go. It's a return to something we used to do before, like looking at the maps on the wall behind you. It's this adventure and exploration of the
Yeah,
mind and body.
there's so much that we could talk about here, so much that could be said about why this is good for you. There's no doubt that being good at something, being a master craftsman, is also really fun. Um, but, and I think this is the hard part for people, sometimes just that initial step of saying, you know what, I'm kind of sick of being comfortable all the time. I want to do something that challenges me. That's where people get stuck, because it's, it's easy to be comfortable, right? But if you consciously, deliberately make that decision, I want to do something that I'm not sure I can do, or I want to do something that makes me uncomfortable. I want to do something that challenges me so that I grow, so that I learn a new skill. Once you take that step and you do it, I find that most people, again, if you have a safe place to do it, if you have a guide, you did in this instance, Andrew, somebody was there who could say, oh no, that, that maybe that's not the way to do it, or try this or try that. And if they're a good teacher, they can lead you through that, and you gain so much. You realize, first of all, why was I ever scared of this? I shouldn't have been. This is enriching. This is fun. I'm not good at it yet, but I want to be. That's the hurdle that people have to get over. And then two, taking on a new, like being a master is fun, but learning is also a lot of fun. Expanding what you're capable of doing is a lot of fun, and I think it's actually addictive. Once you do it once, you want to try other things. Oh, I can be a woodworker now. Oh, I want to be a musician now. Oh, I want to be maybe you could take that too far, but it just liberates you to say, there's no reason to hesitate. If I want to do something, I should try it.
Yeah, I think we all have this need for a sense of competence, right? So you look at like self attribution theory, one of the things that we all need is a sense of competence. But once you've got a competence, then what do you crave? You crave novelty, right? You want more and different stimulation. And you're not going to get that. You're only going to get that up to a certain point if you ride the same routes every day, which probably most of us do. I know I do. And having a way to really breathe some new life into that activity sounds amazing. And do you see that experience has this kind of broader transformative impact on the people who go on these trips? So then they're like, what's next? I want to, do this, or maybe it's outside of
Yeah, that
cycling, like
I
you're saying,
definitely
even.
see that. And not to sound, not to get into too much of the business side, but that's kind of my hope too, is they go on one of these trips and they love it so much they want to repeat something similar, but in a different location perhaps, or maybe something a little bit bigger or more challenging. So that hopefully creates repeat customers. It's about being able for somebody to push their boundaries while respecting some absolutes. Um, and somewhat ironically, I think, is what I'm affording is an somewhat convenient opportunity for people to do this in small doses. I have, over time and effort, sort of created the ability to go on a lot of trips for myself, have these experiences. Now I want to take that and turn it around and give it back to people. Not everybody can do this all the time. Not everybody has the ability to plan a trip, to understand what's involved. And so again, like, I come in and I conveniently place that in front of them and say, here's what I think you're capable of. Here's what I think we should do. Let's bat this around, go back and forth,
Mhm.
customize it to you, the experience you want. And they can get on a plane, come here, or meet me somewhere in Europe, or wherever the case may be, and have that experience. And it's a convenience, but it's also a challenge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's Scott, I want to go back to you for a minute because I know over the winter you trained for some cross country ski races, and I believe that was kind of a new and different thing for you, right? The
Yeah.
distances you were doing.
I had done a lot of skiing, but it was earlier in my life, and I hadn't competed in a long time. So it was a way of freshening it up and getting something different into my life. It required going to new places to find snow, and it was mini taste of maybe what people are getting and you're doing. You know, I wasn't off piste or anything like that, but I think we all need to freshen it up, right?
Got to keep it fresh and clean. And Chris, as you talked about this a little bit. You've had a couple of different phases of your career. Like me, you were a journalist for a long time. And also, like me and like a number of other guests I've had on here, you decided, hey, I'm going to move in a different direction. Part of what strikes me about what you're describing is the process that you're taking people through is very analogous to Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, number one. And number two, I think one of the superpowers that people have who have a foundation as a storyteller or as a journalist is they understand the power of narratives to shape culture, to shape products, to shape outcomes in society and life. And with what you're doing, you're creating a narrative experience for people to go have. Why were you drawn to doing this specific thing at this specific moment in
That's a
time?
big question, and I'll try to keep it in a short, relatively short answer. There is also another component that I'd introduce here, which is I had a former life as a scientist. So there's the scientist in me that loves an experiment. There's the journalist in me that loves a story. And there's the kid in me that has always wanted to be an explorer and a guide and chart new paths for myself and others. And so you take all those together, combined with a little bit of like dissatisfaction of working for others in a lot of ways in different capacities, and you bring that together to the point where I'm at, and it was time to launch this thing. And does that actually answer the question you were getting at? Okay.
No, I think you're kind of dodging it. Let's get more specific. Yeah, I'm not going to let you hide on this one. That's why you're on
So
the show, man.
rephrase the question, please. So I will.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So when you decided to start this specific business, you indicated, hey, this was going to require doing and
Sure.
learning new and different things. And like you're doing the thing. And if you think about hypothesis, test, learn, iterate, where did you start with this idea? When did you make that leap and say, yeah, this is the thing that I'm going to do? And what fears did you have when you made that commitment?
I've been thinking about it for years. I've been running this experiment in my head for many years and having lots of conversations with friends that know a lot about business, a lot more about business, are successful in entrepreneurial in ways that I never thought I could be. It was, again, it does go back to, it was this culmination of, I was in a situation where a, 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 a job that I thought was going to be a quote unquote dream job, I thought it was going to be amazing in some ways, didn't work out that way. But I had always had this idea in the back of my head, and I had been having these conversations. And I just decided to say, well, why don't I live the story that I'm wanting to tell to people? Like, I'm wanting to say you can and should take on challenges to grow as a person. Well, here's one for me. I'm not a business person. Okay, I'll figure that out. I don't know how to create an LLC. Oh, I'll figure that out too. There's little stuff and there's big stuff. And yeah, and you just,
I've been there.
yeah, we all have. We
Me
all have.
too.
With lots of things. And again, it goes right back to that point about the first step is the hardest. The little hurdle of, oh God, there's so many of these little things that I don't know how to do them. And I don't want to ask Ben Delaney, who just started, like, how do you do it? Well, I'll just figure it out. And you take the first step, and then you're on your way. And then, of course, you're like a deer in headlights. Holy, what the hell have I just done? I don't know how to do this. And then you'd call up Ben Delaney and you ask him for some advice. But no, you figure it out, and it's absolutely an experiment, a business experiment, a personal experiment, a storytelling endeavor. Like what do I have time to do as an individual to spread the word, to create a brand? Again, that's a whole other part of this thing too. Is within a business, of course, marketing is a huge thing, and I've actually always been somewhat averse to marketing as a concept and as a thing. Probably because I'm not skillful at it. Probably because I'm not built in a way that I think a marketing person should be built. I'm not very vocal about things. I'm fairly quiet. I'm very observant. I've got some of those qualities. Like I'm that storyteller that's taking it all in and looking at it and then going back to my own little comfortable space and writing that story and then talking to people one-on-one. And that's my comfortable place. But here we are talking about taking on challenges. And so I'm fully in it, doing things that I never thought I would do, doing things I'm not at all comfortable with, but doing them makes me more comfortable to do them more. And of course, always knowing that I get to ride my bike in beautiful places around the world. And that's what I'm really comfortable doing and what I want to be doing. So it's all a means to an end, and it all comes together, and it won't work if I don't do all of it right now. So does that answer your question better? Somewhat. All right.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
Sure.
Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a question? So, being someone who loves adventures and getting out there like you are, it's a different thing to be going off on your own and riding around Iceland, having this amazing adventure with all the uncertainty, versus taking however many other people go on a trip out there and having to be responsible to some degree for delivering a certain kind of experience safely to them. Are you finding that this is checking the boxes in your own personal need, in satisfying your own personal need for adventure still, or do you have to get that some other way? Or
I would say both. I mean, it definitely does. What it does is it allows me to take people to places that I love, which helps me explain to them why I love it so much, show them why I love it so much, and that opens my eyes and reminds me why I love it so much. I've ridden around Boulder,
nice.
all these roads, all these famous roads, some of these non-famous roads, hundreds and hundreds of times. And they're great, but I don't really appreciate them that much. You get blind to the fact that how good it is. And then a group comes here and you take them to that spot and that other spot, and you're like, wow, I took this place for granted. This place is amazing. And the joy and satisfaction you get from showing people who have the same adventurous spirit you do, or if it's friends and family, loved ones, people that you love, showing them places that you love just helps you appreciate that place even more. So I can get adventure from it, but I also get this other reward from it too. And of course, I am definitely going to fit in my own personal solo challenges or challenges with just friends, not paying guests at times, because I need that too. I want that too. And that'll help me be a better guide, I think. So.
Yeah, great.
Chris, how far ahead did you think with your plan for the business before you actually took that first step and said, yeah, this is what I'm doing? And then, jumped into the void of I'm forming my first LLC and figuring that out.
Expose my limited business experience. I would say that if I'm totally honest, I thought about 1 year ahead. I said, I just have to do it, and I'm going to do it this way to start, and I'm going to take in some data, and then I'm going to assess, and I'm going to make some changes if need be. And I know I'm not going to nail it from the start. I've worked with Trevor Connor on this podcast for many years, and he's a brilliant guy, and he's a scientist, and he taught me a lot of things over the years. He has a lot of these sayings, and he has a lot of sort of aphorisms and principles that he lives by, and one of them is the most important decision you make is not the first decision, it's the second decision. So the first decision was, let's do it. The second decision is, of course, this is like a simplification, and there's 47 decisions you have to make, actually. But the big second one is, did I do it right? And if you did, great. You probably didn't, though. And so the second one is, how do I change it? What do I need to do to take that next step? And then that's your decision, and then the second one comes after that. So there's always a second decision. You're always kind of assessing the situation based on, again, going back to my scientific roots, sort of based on data. There's some intuition here. I'm going into this a little bit blind. I have this strange habit of trying to do things alone and by myself rather than always asking for someone who's maybe done this 1,000 times before, because I want the challenge, and I just like figuring stuff out on my own. So yeah, I didn't think that far ahead. I didn't think that far ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, completely. That makes sense. And sometimes that can actually work in your favor. And I'm hearing you talk about going through this process of forming the business, the different steps that you had to take, the first decision, the second decision. Something that I'm thinking about is working with writers, which we've all done. And in particular, when I work with younger people who are new to the discipline of being a professional writer or communicator in whatever capacity. And something I've seen a lot of people struggle with who are entering those fields, and this is probably axiomatic in any field, is that they're kind of crushed when they find out that they're not a first draft, last draft writer. And I haven't met a lot of human beings who can produce perfect copy, journalism, whatever, out of the gate. There might be a few out there. In my experience, it's a lifelong learning experience, and you're always going to be able to improve your work. And whether it's something that you're writing, whether it's an article, a blog post, some marketing collateral, or you're making these decisions to form a business, going back to that scientific method, the agile method of hypothesis, test, learn, repeat, is really how you can start to have some velocity and get the ball rolling. It's only when you're stuck and you don't make that jump because you're afraid it won't be perfect that nothing actually happens, because you're just crushed by the burden of expectation, right?
Yeah. Another lesson learned from a good friend who's has done a lot of business creation, is very entrepreneurial, is he puts it more bluntly. He's just like, do the effing thing. Like, do it. You can't sit here and think it out forever. You'll never perfect it in your mind. You have to do it. So he just got sick of hearing me talk about it or run through iteration after iteration in my mind of what it should, quote unquote, should be or could be. He's like, just do it. Just effing do it. Stop talking about it. So there's some of that too. And yeah, he wasn't the only one saying that. He wasn't the only one pushing me to do that, but that was always in the back of my head is, yeah, he's right. I don't know what this can turn into because it's nothing until I do it.
Have there been other things that you enjoy doing that you've had to stop doing so that you can make space to focus on the business?
I wouldn't say so. No, I think the reason, or part of the reason why I had a 1-year plan, if you want to call it that, and I'm treating this fairly casually, is and I don't want to sound selfish here, but my life, my family, my daughter, my wife are as important as anything to me. And so I didn't want a business to take over my life. I've seen that happen with other people, and it honestly, it just makes me sad. It's like, I don't think that, I know this is maybe some people will say this is silly or whatever, but I don't think working so hard to create something is worth sacrificing family happiness, health, mental health. The burden of stress is incredible, and I didn't want it. So you could call what I'm doing baby steps or just practical, reasonable, and healthy. So no, to get back to your question, I don't really feel like I sacrificed anything or gave up anything or really tweaked too much in order to do what I'm doing. I feel much happier now than I did a year ago when I was doing something else that I thought was going to be an incredible professional position and decision, and it wasn't.
So does this mean we shouldn't expect to see an Alter Explorations franchise anytime soon?
The 1-year plan didn't involve hiring anybody. I want it to be me. This is my vision of what it should be. That doesn't mean it can't grow, but not this first year. And I'm gonna. It's young. This year is young, and I don't know where year 2 is going to take me. No franchises, definitely no franchises. I do have kits with my brand on it, but you won't see others, not that many others wearing it.
Well, that's part of the power of the LLC right there. Yeah. So Chris, to go in a slightly different direction, your book, The Haywire Heart, was a highly, highly influential book for me and for many other people. And like a lot of endurance athletes, I've gone through the process of, very long history of training, competing with mixed results. And then when I was training the most I had in my entire life and doing the longest, hardest events, lo and behold, I started having some heart problems and I had AFib, chased everything down. I didn't end up having a cardiac ablation. I have many friends who have, but your book was incredibly important in my life and kind of helped me to navigate that process. And something that I'm wondering with the work that you're doing and with your personal relationship with endurance sports, to going through the process of writing, researching that book and connecting with so many people who'd had these challenges with their hearts because of endurance sports, impact your personal relationship with the sport that you love or
absolutely.
how you approach it?
When I first heard of Leonard Zinn, my co-author's issue up on Flagstaff Mountain in Boulder, I was not really aware of the condition nor the prevalence by any means. And I wrote an article and it snowballed into the book because so many people, colleagues, friends, former racing companions, I don't want to say they came out of the woodwork, but they just, the volume of people that we started hearing from was overwhelming, and we knew it was a much bigger thing, a more prevalent thing. And I had a somewhat scary incident. I was writing the book. I was training for a really big challenge. One of these challenges that I used to take on when I worked at VeloNews. I was, essentially an experiment of one. I was going to do this Everesting thing. I was going to do it up Mount Evans because which is for those who don't know, it's a 14,000 foot mountain here in Colorado with a road to the top. I figured, just because the silly way that I'm built, if you're going to do an Everesting challenge, you might as well make it a really hard one instead of just a run-of-the-mill Everesting challenge. And I had just probably 3 or 4 months prior to this become a father for the first time. And then I was hit with weird heart symptoms what the hell's going on? I had no idea. I'm writing this book. Like, oh my God, the worst comes to mind. Oh, I've done it to myself. How ironic, how sad, how tragic. I'm writing this book about heart arrhythmias, and I've just created one inside of myself by taking on all this stress and overtraining and etc. It turned out that it was simply a benign manifestation of the stresses I was putting myself through. And I stopped doing what I was doing in terms of the training. Knowing the information, having a stress test helped me say, okay, maybe I haven't done this to myself. And of course, in that way, calmed me down and led to the palpitations and the abnormal symptoms going away. But it was an eye-opening experience. Your heart and having issues with your heart is incredibly frightening, especially if you haven't read a book that says it could be this, which is not really something you should worry about, or it could be this, which is something you should very much worry about. If you don't have that guidance, anything going on in your heart is pretty frightening or very frightening. And having spoken with people who gained so much joy and so much just endurance sports were their life. It was their outlet. It was their therapy. It was their source of joy. And some of these folks that I spoke with honestly couldn't do it anymore. They had trained to the point where they had developed an arrhythmia, and it was dangerous for them to do what they used to do. That is a hard-hitting message, and I didn't want that to happen to me. And so, again, sorry for wandering around a bit, but to get back to your question, writing the book, doing the research, speaking to people greatly impacted what I do and how I do it. And I think it really just made me that much more aware of paying attention to my body, listening to the signals it sends me. I think that a lot of people who are endurance athletes, in fact, I know, they push through painful situations by their very nature. They often ignore little issues. They're driven, determined to train, and they set goals, and they want to, and they're very stubbornly fixed on attaining those goals. And oftentimes that blinds them to the things that their body is telling them, for better or worse. Sometimes it works out in their favor. They push through a little injury, it goes away, they win a race, awesome. Other times, their heart starts acting funny, it starts fluttering, they ignore it, it does damage, and it leads to something life-changing. And so what I'm getting at is all of the information I learned and gained from writing this book and this process just taught me to listen more, listen very closely to what's going on in my body. Now, again, does that prevent anything from happening to me? No, but being in tune with what my body is trying to tell me is extremely important. Those signals are there for a reason, right? We have to choose to listen to them.
We do. When you get the yeah, you better listen to the messages, or this has gotten a bit somber. But yeah, I mean, when you get the message, you need to listen, and then you need to hang up the phone, and you need to do something with that information. And it sounds like what you experienced, Chris, was pretty similar to what I experienced, which mine also started to happen after I'd had my first child, my son, Sam, who I love. And I was like, I want to be around for Sam as long as possible. I want to be healthy. And we've all spent time with world-class endurance athletes. And I think people who are not on the inside don't understand that the lifestyle, the training, what these people are doing it's not a healthy thing, actually, in aggregate. And the way a world-class athlete trains is not what's going to set you up for long-term health. And there's, there's something in the middle, and there's so much that you can get out of competition, camaraderie, community, everything that comes with endurance sports and all other forms of sport that people enjoy doing. And the longer you can do that in life, the better. But yeah, it's pretty scary when those things pop up. And for me, that meant, I had this point where I was like, yeah, I'm not sure taking my heart rate from resting heart rate to like 190 beats per minute and 10 seconds at the beginning of a cyclocross race and then pinning it there for an hour. I'm like, I don't know if that's the thing I need to do to my body anymore. I don't know if I need to go race for 6-7 hours at a time and try to win a big gravel race. And by the way, if I tried to do that today, I'd be racing like Alejandro Valverde. So, right. Good luck to me. But I also was curious, Chris, you were the host of a podcast for a very long time. You got to talk to all kinds of amazing world-class athletes. Same thing on the research side. This is a big question, but what did you learn as someone who was hosting a podcast like that? What did you take away from it?
I spoke with some of the world's best physiologists, sports psychologists, neuroscientists, nutritionists. Every episode was a massive lesson, honestly. And it taught me, I really bought into you don't really need to go fast all the time to be fast on race day. You really don't want to do it that way. The polarized training method and Dr. Seiler's research and work, it hit home, I think, because it's somewhat how I train naturally. And it just said, oh, well, it felt good to think that I landed on that, maybe by instinct, and the data and his research was supporting that. So I don't do a lot of interval. I'm not racing very much anymore. What I'm doing now is I'm doing the occasional bike packing race or something like that. I'm training to be fit because I'm guiding. And so I want to be able to, obviously I have to keep up with every guest. But I also want to be strong enough that I can occasionally say, hey guys, I'm going to ride up the road a minute or two and get some great photos of you. So I have to dart up the road. And so I have to be fit, and I want to be fit for them and for the profession. But I am very strategic about how I do it. I'm not a person that's going hard all the time. I live with, my wife is a chef. We eat very well. I don't go to extremes in any sense, whether it's training or supplementation of any kind. We just eat really well, nice, wholesome meals. It's not, I guess it's not, I don't think it's very sexy or glamorous what I do, but I think that if you were to talk to Dr. Seiler or some of these other very experienced physiologists and coaches, the best don't do that either. And sorry to go on a tangent here. There's pro athletes. There's not a whole lot that's healthy about them. Performance and health are far apart oftentimes. But you have to remember, this is their profession and it's for a finite period of time. If they were to seek performance for 50 years, they'd have lots of problems. But in their 20s and for a finite period of time, maybe a decade, that's okay. But their training, a lot of it isn't incredibly sophisticated. It's time, it's perseverance, discipline, eating well. You don't have to do a lot of fancy stuff in a lot of cases to get really, really good. It's just a volume thing, how much they're able to do, how much they're willing to put their body through, but then also allow themselves to recover. I think as a final point, that's one of the other really big things I learned from all the episodes we did at Fast Talk. I think you hear it a lot. Most people don't let themselves rest enough. they do all the hard work. They train really hard, but they never rest really hard. And you can't reap the rewards of super compensation and the whole load, training load concept if you don't give your body time to recover and come back stronger. That's the whole principle there, right? If you're constantly just beating it up, it's going to slowly decline rather than improve. So that was a huge lesson that we preached over and over again on Fast Talk.
That's another huge difference between someone who is passionate about endurance sports, perhaps even trying to compete at a high level as an amateur, and a professional athlete. A professional athlete, generally, they're going to have that rest day where they're sitting around on a couch with their legs up. They're not doing anything. They're sleeping 8 to 10 hours. They're not on their rest day like, oh, yeah, I have to go chainsaw the pine tree that fell down in my yard, watch the kids, dig a ditch, like whatever. That's not what's going down on their rest day. And I think that's how a lot of amateur athletes treat the rest day. They're just substituting in high stress physical activity they have to do to manage their household, or something that's highly mentally stressful that's injecting a bunch of cortisol into their system. And it's very hard for them to find a way to balance that. So that's, that's a really good point, Chris.
Yeah, and these athletes also are far outliers genetically too. They're even with all the rest and things that they're still able to recover. And so when we start trying to model what we're doing with all the rest of life, even a little bit after what they're doing, we can really get in
I think,
a lot of trouble.
Every amateur athlete has to remember that the body doesn't really know or isn't able to differentiate training stress versus work stress versus marital stress versus professional stress. It's all stress. So if, like, back to your point, Andrew, if you're trying to build a training schedule and you've got intervals on Wednesday and a big ride on Thursday and 2 big rides on the weekend, and then Monday you have a gigantic presentation at work, and Tuesday you have you're serving on a court case as a juror, I don't know, whatever the case may be, you have to take all of that stuff into consideration when you lay out that training plan, because those stressful things don't allow you to recover like you think you are, physically or mentally, and you need both.
Absolutely. And Chris, to go back to your new business, when people want to work with you, what are the mechanics of the process? How do you design these experiences?
Because of the nature of what I'm doing, it's an application online. And in that application, they tell me a bit about what they are looking for in terms of the terrain, the duration of the days, their experience, the destination, of course, and any other things they want to do off the bike. And that's for them, and it's for me, and it's for other people on the trip. Because it's meant to be challenging. It goes back to the model of whether it's mountaineering or big mountain skiing or heli skiing. You wouldn't want a group that contained a beginner and an elite skier with a ton of experience on the same trip. That's dangerous for everybody involved. And it also will impact the experience and the fun they can have. So I need to some degree vet these people, that they're of a certain caliber, and that my trips are right for them, that they're not looking for something luxurious, and that should be evident from the website and how I explain the trips. But yeah, they send in that application, and then we have a conversation. I might have some follow-up questions. If they want to go to the Dolomites, a place I've been to many, many times, have many connections there, have ridden a ton, know all the roads, whether you want paved or dirt or everything in between, I can quickly shoot back an itinerary. This is what I think you would love to do. What do you think? And from there, off we go. If they want to come to me and say, hey, I saw that film that came from your bikepacking circumnavigation of Iceland. Well, geez, I can't do that, but I want to do a portion of that. Okay, great. Here's some options, and I'll go back to them with we could go south and we could do these roads, and the itinerary would look like this, or we could go up north to the West Fjords or something like that. And again, it's a place I know. I only want to guide in places I know. I do not want to get into the business of being a person that charges money to take them someplace I don't know anything about. Sure, I could look at Instagram and figure out the nice roads to be on. I could go online, but that's not guiding, like that's cheating. I only take people to places, Colorado, the Dolomites, Iceland, some other places that I've been to a lot, and I have connections there, and I can open people's eyes beyond what they see on Instagram, like culturally, historically, open doors that they wouldn't be able to open themselves, take them places they didn't realize existed because they're not on Instagram, to move beyond Instagram as a source of travel inspiration. And that's sort of the process. But it application and then conversation. That's what it is.
What have you gotten out of running these trips? What's the feeling that you get when people have this experience on the other side of it?
It's an amazing feeling. Like I was saying earlier, to take somebody to a place where I've been so many times, and it has opened my eyes to so many things, and then being able to turn around and get, in a way, sort of give back to the life that cycling has brought me and endurance sports has brought me. Show them, if they're not that experienced in international cycling travel, show them how it can be done, show them why it's so amazing, introduce them to local people that will have conversations with them about, and they'll have these connections, whether it's over food or bikes or place or time or history, or maybe they have a little bit of Italian heritage in them, and I take them to the Dolomites, and there's just always opportunities for these little connections. When I was earlier speaking about I kind of provide this convenience of creating these experiences, these challenging experiences for those who can't create it themselves. What I want is, when somebody is approaching December 31st and they're thinking back on the year, and they're thinking to themselves, what were the highlights? They're talking with their spouse or family or something at a party. What were the highlights of your year? Everybody does this. I do it a lot. And I look back and I look forward. I want them, the first thing to say is, well, that trip I took to the Dolomites with Alter Exploration, that was absolutely blew away everything else I did. Work, who cares? That presentation I gave on May 31st about blah, 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 it doesn't matter. But that trip to the Dolomites, that 8 or 9 or 10 days, oh my God, that was amazing. You should do it yourself, or I can't wait to do another one. That's the sense that I want to bring, or that's what I want to bring to people, and that's what I've seen. People, it's crazy. I actually can't believe it, but I've had so many people on trips say that was either the best ride I've ever taken in my life, or B, that was the best trip I've ever taken in my life. And obviously that just makes me incredibly happy to hear. That's what I want to do. It's hard to do. I didn't think I would hear that, but I guess I'm doing something right.
Yeah, I think that's a sure sign the experiment has been a success.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Very true. Very true.